Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Ukraine is grappling with the ongoing toll of Russian strikes, with at least 6 civilians killed and dozens wounded in Kharkiv, Poltava, and Sumy. The Polish Foreign Ministry has called the recent attacks on Lviv and western Ukraine as barbaric. At the same time, Kyiv reported a strike on the Russian Baltic port of Ust-Luga, targeting energy facilities. Adding to the crisis, Hungary has announced a phased halt to gas exports to Ukraine over disputes related to the damaged Druzhba pipeline. Now, to analyze the latest, we're joined by Andreas Umland, Policy Fellow, European Policy Institute in Kyiv. So there's actually an interesting report I've just noticed here on the what's happened because of the capacity. This is from Reuters. The capacity of what Russia can produce and export oil capacity-wise is down about 40%, apparently, because of a lot of these strikes on Western facilities. If we're looking at the Baltics, if we're looking also at the Black Sea, but also seizure of tanks, you name it. So now we've had another recent strike. So how much, let's say, more is this going to damage Russia as these strikes continue by Ukraine?
Well, one hopes that the technological development in Ukraine of long-range weaponry, drones and cruise missiles is such that this will go on. In a way, this is a sign of the failed sanctions policy, because basically Ukraine is now doing what the sanctions should have done, namely reduce the Russian oil export, and the sanctions are there and they have some effect. But unfortunately, much of the oil export is still going on through the shadow fleet, through third countries, and that's why, in a way, Ukraine has no other choice than to influence the war via these attacks on the energy infrastructure of Russia. And that is the energy infrastructure, of course, that is not related to civilian support, but which is related to the export, first of all, of oil and gas. And this export is financing the war. That is something that could have been avoided if the sanctions would have been more serious.
Mm-hmm. All right. So interesting there, as you pointed out. I mean, this is something Ukraine is targeting not civilian, but this is stuff for military use. This helps Russia in terms of its war effort. Let's also stay with Ukraine for a moment, a little bit more in the Central Eastern European region. Hungary, not currently a friend, at least Mr. Orban is not a friend of Ukraine's. I mean, that rhetoric keeps ratcheting up. I just want to share a recent statement from him. I think he said this just yesterday, calling Ukraine a very dangerous country, a terrorist state, and saying that Hungarians will not yield to this terror. Now, also introducing those phase-outs of gas that Hungary sends to Ukraine. I think it's about 45%. That's what's coming from Hungary. How significant is that? Where do you see this going, and what do we make of Orban's statement there?
That is apparently now his strategy to keep himself in power. He's unpopular in Hungary. There are lots of scandals, domestic scandals around the government about the misuse of EU funds and other stories like that. And that's why Orban has now made, in a very strange way, Ukraine a domestic issue in Hungarian politics, and is blaming Ukraine for all sorts of problems that Hungary has, but not because of Ukraine, of course, but rather because of the failed policies in Hungary, foreign policies and domestic policies. And now he's using the leverage he has with these gas pipelines that are important for Ukraine, or with his veto in the European Union, with his veto power to exert pressure. And he's creating a sort of an artificial conflict, I would say, between Hungary and Ukraine, in order to justify the failures of his own policies, and in order to portray his domestic political opponents as agents of a foreign power, oddly enough, of Ukraine, which is an embattled country fighting a war against the biggest country of the world, the biggest nuclear weapon state of the world. So that is pure electoral campaigning and propaganda and manipulation.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it does seem to just heat up. As we know, April 12th is the day when Hungarians will vote. If we look at some of the most recent polling, I believe it is Tisza that is still ahead of Orbán's old party. I want to ask you, looking at terrorist states, let's jump over briefly to the region, but also the Middle East. There's also another interesting report recently from the Financial Times, apparently that Russia is supplying Iran with drones to fight back against the United States and Israel. I mean, if there's truth to that, first of all, what do you make of it? Intelligence reports apparently putting that there. Does that, let's say, change the calculus of countries potentially doing more against Russia? Is this more to involvement of European nations, or how do you see this latest report there?
We'll have to see whether this is indeed true. What we, I think, know already is that Russia has been providing intelligence to Iran about the location of American units, troops, and for the targeting of Iranian drones and missiles. That is, as far as I know, now confirmed. Whether there have indeed been drones given by Russia to Iran, that would be an interesting question. If that is indeed the case, I think it should have an impact also on American foreign policies, Israeli foreign policies as well. And what this is an expression of is of the new confrontation in the 21st century, a Cold War not any longer between communism and capitalism, but instead between democracies and autocracies. And an odd cooperation here between countries that have very different histories and cultures, but that have similar systems, both autocratic systems that exist in different civilizations, and democratic system that exists in countries with different cultural heritage. And that is, so to say, an expression of the new front line, the international front line, autocracies versus democracies, rather than, let's say, a clash of civilization. This mutual cooperation between Iran and Russia is just one case of this new international confrontation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know your expertise. I know that you've also spent time in the Baltic region. I mean, that you've been between Kyiv and, I believe, the Nordics quite a few times observing Russia. Where do you see now, let's see, Russia's capacity? And we've just, with this report I mentioned earlier, with revenues down, the Ukrainians striking against really key infrastructure areas, Russia weakened. Can it, in any way, still pose a significant threat? What are its capacities looking in the next few weeks in the Baltics, in Ukraine and Iran? Just a brief assessment.
I think the main focus for Russia is, of course, Ukraine, and much of the other things that Russia is doing in world politics is related to the Russian-Ukrainian war. And one of these actions that Russia has been now doing over the last 4 years is trying to distract, in a way, the Western countries that are supporting Ukraine from this challenge, and to refocus, so to say, Western attention on a possible threat, let's say, in the Baltic region. I wouldn't exclude fully an escalation in the Baltic region that could happen in the context of other developments in the world and on the front line in Ukraine. But my hunch would be that rather this additional confrontation, escalation, could happen after there is some sort of ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front. Then I'm afraid the Russian war machine could redirect itself to other regions, to the Caucasus, to Central Asia, and perhaps also to the Baltic region, and then we could see an escalation there as well. But my guess, and that is a speculation in a way, is that there will be no escalation in other regions by Russia as long as the war in Ukraine doesn't halt.
All right. Look, thanks for that assessment. Always a pleasure having you. Andreas Umland there joining us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.